Workistic, your work wellness resource on the go. A Thoughts to Inspire interview. At the Work Wellness Institute, the future of work starts with well-being. Dive into our Workplace Wellness Work Bites for summaries of our carefully curated trending webinars, published workplace research findings, and informative interviews with key industry subject matter experts. Learn and stay informed about work wellness anywhere, anytime with Workistic, your work wellness resource on the go. Welcome to our Thoughts to Inspire series, bringing together subject matter experts from across sectors to present evidence-informed, thought-provoking ideas and approaches. These interviews invite conversation and bring attention to the most pivotal and timely workplace wellness topics.
I'm Dr. Cameron Stockdale, the President and CEO of the Work Wellness Institute. And today we have a unique interview for you. We've invited Erika Seltenreich-Hodgson, a retired Olympic swimmer, to speak about athletes' mental health. And I'll turn the floor over to you at this point. If you can give us a little bit about your background and why you're so passionate about this subject of mental health with athletes.
Absolutely. Hi, thank you for having me on the show. I'm really excited to be here. I'm so excited to talk about this topic. It's something, like we said, I'm super passionate about. So I started competitively swimming when I was 10. I swam for 14 years, and for the last 7 of those years, I was a professional athlete. So that means I was traveling the world. I was representing Team Canada every single summer and getting to race as a Team Canada athlete, which was just really, really exciting. It was a phenomenal experience. I'm so grateful for my whole career. I really, it's largely shaped me into the person that I am today. But I also think there's a side to professional sport that we don't talk about very much. And there's a lot of stigma surrounding mental health and mental illness in athletes. And that's something I really want to highlight always, but hopefully today as well. So yeah, thank you again for having me.
Erika, can you give me an idea and an overview of what it means to be an athlete that performs at that level that's good enough to make it to the Olympics?
Yeah, so the lifestyle is pretty intense. It is your whole world, basically. It's your job, it's everything that you're working towards. So the bedtime that I set myself was so that I could wake up for morning workout, like to get enough hours of sleep. And the food that I ate was all to either recover from one workout or get ready for the next. And all of the choices that I kind of revolved my life around were really catered towards whether or not it was going to make or break my performance. So, we trained upwards of 25 hours a week, usually around 20 to 22 in the pool, depending on the week. But also, I did weight room training, and we did med balls and pre-workout training and post-workout stretching. I did physiotherapy, I got massage. There was just so many aspects to my life that were so focused on whatever competition I had to do that year. So it was very, very intense. I was very, very exercise-centric. It was a lot of stress as well.
Right. I've heard you describe yourself as a professional athlete. What does that mean? And can you explain that for us?
Absolutely. So to me, I think professional athletes are somebody who their sport is their job. That's what they do. They wake up every morning and they go to work when they go to the pool or whatever facility that you do your exercise in. I know just in general, professional athletes tend to be people who are getting paid. So that's often the case for sure. I know I started getting paid by the government of Canada at the age of 15. So that's kind of when I look at my professional career as starting. But also if you get good enough, if you get big enough in the public eye, if you have enough of a platform, even organizations can start sponsoring you. So a lot of the people that you think about who represent, major sports companies, those people are all obviously professionals. But, more than just making the money to be able to train, to go to the pool every day, to travel, all of that stuff, I really think it does come down to whether or not you identify your sport as your job.
So this life that you've created yourself, the training and the eating and training, etc., how does that affect you as a person?
I think swimming and growing up in a professional and competitive sport really, really shaped who I became as a person. Like, across the board in a lot of really good and some not so good ways. I mentioned earlier, I believe that we start training at the age of 10, a couple hours a week. But then by the age of 13, I was already swimming, 18 to 20 hours a week. I had 9 different workouts. It was almost as intense or took up more of my brain space than school did at the time too. And the way that you grow up and, we learn all of these really amazing lessons at such a young age. I learned to really, really good schedule management, time management, perseverance. I learned to use everything as motivation. I have goal setting skills. There's so many things that I learned from such a young age that I kind of take for granted now as just part of who I am. But on the flip side too, when you learn those things from such a young age, it's easy to forget that we are kids when we're learning it. We're very impressionable, and it's easy for us to take things very, very literally. So at the age of 13, when I learned that there were no excuses to miss a workout except for, there were 3. There's recovering from a surgery, there's having a fever, and there's vomiting. Those are the 3 things that you were allowed to miss a workout for. And that makes sense when you're 13, because 13-year-olds aren't really huge on commitment, so you got to set some parameters there. But then there's those of us who take that really literally, and by the age of 17, I did not miss a single workout. There was no excuse ever. There was never, swimming was my main priority, and it's something I learned from just such a young and impressionable stage in my life.
You've been an outspoken advocate around athlete mental health. This life that you created for yourself, did that create any struggles for you personally along the way?
Definitely. So I've been really open about my struggle with depression. 2015 came around. I had just had the best summer of my life internationally. I came 4th at Commonwealth Games, just missed a medal. It was really, really exciting, my best time. So many good things were happening for me. My future was looking awesome. And then I came into school the next year, and I was, gearing down and getting into training. And the symptoms of depression that I experienced, they seeped in slowly. So I didn't really recognize what was happening as it was going on. It's just the days that I woke up not really, motivated or wanting to go to the pool started happening more often. And before I knew it, it was at the point where I wasn't wanting to, go to school anymore. I didn't really enjoy any of the other little extracurricular activities that I was normally going to. I didn't really want to hang out with my friends anymore. I stopped sleeping properly. I stopped eating properly. A lot of aspects of my life that I'd always had under so much control, suddenly I didn't have control in anymore. And I took that as a personal failure. So I was doubly hard on myself for that. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, and there's not really anything at fault necessarily. Mental illness, it's, a lot of it you can't control. But I wasn't educated on mental health and mental illness. I knew what depression was, but I didn't think I fit the exact box for what the definition was to me. So I was like, well, it's not something that I have. I didn't think athletes who are, at the top of their game could experience a mental illness. So there was such a lack of education and understanding. I didn't have the vocabulary to talk about it. I didn't know who to reach out to. So that was really the beginning of my mental health journey there, and the beginning of understanding of what mental illness and mental health looks like for athletes. I was really lucky though. My mother and I are really close, and despite the fact that I was across the country from her, she started to recognize that there was some symptoms in me that weren't going away. They were repetitive and getting a little bit worrisome. So she asked me to reach out for help, and I did. And that was the first step of my recovery. I went to therapy. I started building this toolbox of ways that I could slowly but surely pull myself out of the hole that I'd found myself in. And the next year I made the Olympic team, which was, something I obviously wouldn't have done had I retired and not talked to anybody about what I was going through and what I was experiencing.
So you mentioned that your mom was a good support person for you in that close relationship. What other supports or systems were available for you as a professional athlete, as you describe it?
I was super privileged as a professional athlete. I came out to UBC because there's a national training center here. So I got to do my undergrad while still training full-time under a national training coach for swimming. Within that group, in that environment, we had so many supported staff. So we had 2 swim coaches, 2 weight room coaches, a yoga instructor, a nutritionist, a doctor, a physiotherapist, a massage therapist, a chiropractor, and a sports psychologist. So that was like a cohort of people that were there to just exclusively make me the best athlete that I could be. And I'm so grateful for that because it really opened up the opportunities that were available to me. I really felt supported a lot of the time. However, if we noticed that group of people that I just listed, all of them except for one were focused on my physical health. And I feel lucky that I had a sports psychologist in general. I think it's a very, very important profession, and it was something that I had to use quite regularly to get myself ready for race preparation and, just handling training and all of that really important aspects of being a professional athlete. However, in Canada, the training program for becoming a sports psychologist, it's a 2-year program, and it does ready them to work with athletes, absolutely. But there's no clinical background in that. So most sports psychologists in Canada don't have the correct education to diagnose and treat people with mental illnesses, which is a bit of a problem, I think, because as hopefully we're all aware, mental illness doesn't discriminate against any one type of person. And as I think we're talking about it more and more, it's becoming more apparent how many athletes really do experience these kind of symptoms. So, like I said, so surrounded by support. I had almost everything that I needed, but I do think there is a really important gap there.
Right. Are there any other gaps that you have identified in the system that would have helped you as an athlete deal with your mental health issues at the time?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of gaps in the system, and they kind of go right from, beginning and recruiting kids at the age of 10 all the way to retirement. I think there's a really, really important gap in the education for our youth. Just, explaining to them what mental health is, what mental illness is, how there's a spectrum and we can all fall on at different places on different days, and just also who to reach out to, what resources are available. There's definitely stuff out there, but how do you find it? How do you teach these kids those boundaries and how to understand who to reach out to, all of those different aspects of it. If we start that conversation young, then they're ready for it if it ever comes. I also think it's really, really important to teach kids to prioritize their own boundaries too, right? Like I mentioned earlier, I grew up and I didn't really know how to set boundaries for myself. I pushed myself past my maximum so much of the time that I didn't know how to not do that anymore. And if we just right from the beginning teach kids that their bodies and their minds are the priority, and then they'll thrive through sport. I just touched on this as well, but I think that gap where we have so many resources available for professional athletes, but so little care for lived experience with mental illness or mental health symptoms of different disorders. When I retired from swimming, I didn't have those support systems anymore. They were gone. Makes sense, I wasn't an athlete anymore, but I was struggling. So I reached out and found myself a new therapist, and I was grateful to find one, but she didn't at all understand the life that I just lived or the things that I was struggling with, having just lost my identity as an athlete. So I think it would be really, really awesome if we had a combination in the mental health side of the support system for athletes, if we had people who were trained on understanding both mental illness and professional sport, so that there's that subset of people available for both, current and retired athletes. And on that same token, I think the last big gap is in the retirement part. There's all of this support for current athletes, and then the second you retire, it's just gone. And all of a sudden you're not surrounded by all of the things that you've grown up with your entire life. And I feel like there's a really, really big area there that we could also work on to help make sure that those athletes kind of seamlessly move on to the next stage of their life.
If you look up your name on the internet, you've been an advocate for mental health since about 2016. Can you tell me how that started, how you really started that advocacy role that you've been involved with?
It started right after I made the Olympics, actually, because I had experienced depression in 2015. I struggled in silence for a very long time. And once I reached out for help, started getting better, recovered quite a bit, and then made the Olympic team, I was able to look back at that whole journey that I'd just been through and realize why there was so long that it took me to reach out for help, like where the gaps were that I experienced and what would have made it helpful for me to, reach out earlier, talk earlier, and get all of that support. And I realized it's because nobody was really talking about it. There was not really a huge conversation. It had started, like Clara Hughes had started talking about her mental health. So, I certainly wasn't the first, but it was very new, and there wasn't really a spokesperson in swimming by any means. So when I made the Olympic team and I suddenly realized I had this platform, we went through all of these interviews right after we made the Olympic team, and it was, such an exciting such an exciting experience, and it was such an integral part of my Olympic journey that it didn't seem authentic to go through those interviews without explaining, what I'd been through and my story. So it was the first time I spoke about it. There was one interview in particular that I did with Swimming Canada that, highlighted that a bit, and it was awesome because it really touched a lot of swimmers and athletes that I really wanted to spread that message to. And the feedback was incredible. I had so many people reach out to me and thank me for doing that conversation, but I had a couple people even reach out and tell me that I was the reason that they reached out for help and that they recognized some of my experience in themselves. And that just kickstarted it immediately. It snowballed. I was like, if I can have that kind of reach just with one interview, what happens if I keep talking about it, And one thing led to another, and I started this initiative at my university called the Student Athlete Mental Health Initiative. I did it with a bunch of athletes who were also all super passionate about mental health, and it was so awesome to see that coming together of people across different sports. And I just kept talking about it, and it's continued to snowball, and here I am now still talking about it and hopefully starting a career where I continue to be able to spread this message and create education and really keep moving this forward.
Right. So we've recently had an Olympic Games, another Summer Olympic Games, and there's been a lot of discussion about mental health discussed around athletes. Do you care to comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's so exciting to see this happen, The discussions that were happening around this Olympics have really never happened before. It feels like the first time that it's really was happening on such a large stage. I know Simone Biles is probably the face of what this conversation looks like right now, and seeing somebody at the absolute upper echelon of their sport, the GOAT, the best person, the best gymnast essentially ever, prioritize her mental health and her physical health and set those boundaries on such a large scale, on such a big stage, I think that's going to have implications moving forward for, kids look up to her, kids see her do that. And, I feel like there was some negative feedback as well around, people watching that and not really understanding why or how. And, I think there was some people who were talking in stigmatizing ways around, she should be able to handle the pressure of such a big competition, et cetera, et cetera. And that's not fair because she's a human being, I think we so often put athletes on this pedestal and forget that they're more than just the entertainment value that they can give us, and they're more than just machines. We have brains, we've got bodies, we are a human being, we are everything that everybody else is. We just are particularly good at something. So that's all just to say that I am so excited that this is happening. I think it's awesome that she set those boundaries. It's really great seeing a bunch of different athletes starting to really talk about this and raise even more awareness. And, before we know it, it's going to hopefully be just a natural part of sport.
So you've been retired for a few years now. How did you know it was time to retire? And what did you think your future was going to look like after you retired?
To answer the first part of that question, I had no idea when it was time to retire. I think that's one of the really big things about growing up in a sport is it was my whole identity. It was everything that I'd ever been, right from the age of 10, all my formative teen years, all of my growth, all of the skills and the large parts of my personality that I grew up with, they were who I was until the age of 24 as an athlete. And we kind of have this mentality of, I'm not going to stop until something makes me. As long as I'm still making the national team, I'm still here. And that's super, super valid. Like, it's so exciting to be on the national team. Like, why would you ever want to stop something like that early? And, it also makes sense from an organizational perspective. Like, they're putting, the major sport organizations, they're putting money, effort, a lot of time into these athletes to develop us into people who can perform really, really well internationally. But that also means that in a lot of cases, they don't think to have conversations with us about retirement and what that could look like. Why would you spend all that money, time, and effort on somebody just to also be like, hey, like, when do you want to retire? Like, do you want to stop? And I understand that from a logistics perspective, but professional athletes live most of their lives as not athletes anymore. The shelf life of an athlete's pretty short. Your body wears and tears. You tend to start the next aspect of your life. So, if we ballpark say that most people are retiring from professional sport in their mid-20s, what is that next step? And without having that conversation at all at any point beforehand, it makes us really confused. Like, when do you know when it is time to stop? And I feel like there's a big gap in that. There's a lot of questions involved, and it's really, really difficult to know. So in all the 3 years that I struggled with a shoulder injury, which I had for the back end of my career, nobody ever really had a conversation with me as to be like, well, what if this injury, stops you from swimming? What will you do next? And, when is too much pain surrounding an injury like that? I never even considered it, in the stress of being injured for so long. There was not one time where I was stressed about the fact that I should be retiring. It was always stressed that I wasn't able to do all of the workouts that everyone else was doing, or, lift weights as heavy as my teammates. So basically what I'm trying to get across is just that retirement in professional athletes is never the priority. It's always just the thing that happens when you physically or mentally cannot go any farther. So it was really difficult. I ended up making that choice mostly to do with my injury. Also, my mental health was starting to struggle a little bit because of the injury. It was all very comorbid there. And then suddenly I made that decision. I retired within a couple of months of making that choice and realizing I was at the end of my line. And I had absolutely no plans for my future. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was confused. I was lost. I knew I wanted to, get a job, but what? I don't know. It took a lot of time to really root through all of the confusion of not being an athlete anymore and having that identity and figuring out what other things I was passionate about.
So you didn't really have a plan for retirement.
No.
Now that you have been retired for a while, what are some of the challenges that you have found?
So swimming is very busy. I trained, like I said, about 30 hours a week, and I did school on the side of it. So at no point during my whole professional career as a swimmer did I have any time to get a part-time job. I was also getting paid through swimming, so I didn't really need one. I was financially capable enough to get myself through that. So, I'm applying for all of these jobs now. I just retired from swimming. I was like, I gotta figure out what to do. I gotta at least make some money now, start myself into the workforce. And so the first thing I did was I just went online and I applied to as many entry-level positions as I could find, just all around Vancouver. I wasn't super picky about what I wanted to do. I hadn't quite figured out what I wanted to do yet, so I figured just anywhere was a good start. And I didn't hear back from any of them. And it's because my resume is unique. I didn't have any previous work experience. I can really sell a lot of the skills I learned as a professional athlete for sure. I know I'm a hard worker. I know I'm a good person to have in the workplace, but it's hard to see that on paper sometimes. And especially with all of these online applications, I don't know how many people relate to this, but when you're sending an application and they always have this little section where it's like, how many years of experience do you have in these different things? And because I'm a truthful person, I always had to put 0 because I've never had a desk job, I've never answered phones, like it was that kind of those questions. And I know that the second I put 0 in all of those, they just shot me into the no pile. I don't even think they saw my resume. So it was very, very hard to make that first step even. I wanted to be in the workplace. I wanted to, figure out what this being an adult in the workplace looked like. But I wasn't really given a chance to do that right off the beginning. So my plan B, which I ended up quite enjoying for the very, very short time that I did it, was I became a hostess at a restaurant just to, get my foot in the door somewhere. And that was fun, but unfortunately that was also a month before COVID hit, and then that happened, and obviously everybody got laid off. So I had one solid month of employment, and then I was unemployed again for several months. And then I was lucky. I started looking for work again in the summer during COVID that first year. And I saw an ad for Work Wellness Institute, and I looked up the website and I was like, wow, this organization really aligns with a lot of the values that I have. And I know that in a lot of ways people do have some, questions as to whether or not they consider professional sport as, an employment or not. But to put myself and be able to get involved with an organization that does something so similar to working with athletes and working having that as a profession, caring about mental health and physical and mental disabilities, and really creating that equity in any type of work environment. I knew that that's something that I wanted to do in sport, so I figured that that would be a really, really great segue into that and getting involved with that, and especially just, like I said, being somewhere that really aligned with the values that I had. So I applied there and I got an interview, and luckily they decided to take a chance on me and my slightly different resume, and it's been really great ever since. It's been lovely working here.
I think you and I have had this discussion previously about what stood out in your resume and why we actually hired you in the first place. You obviously had an interest in mental health, which is obviously the organization does as well. But the fact that you were an athlete, not that you necessarily made it to the Olympics, but that you had trained and worked towards a goal for years, it certainly said to us in the organization that, here's somebody that knows how to work and how to work towards a goal and knows how to put effort forward. And that was really attractive for us as an organization, and what made your resume jump out for us. So, you've talked a little bit about you had no coaching or no instruction about what to expect after retirement. And I think it's really interesting that I think that there's something for athletes to sell about themselves that, I think you described a lot of it at the beginning, where you knew how to set goals and work towards them. It's really attractive for an employer. And for somebody in your position, learning how to sell yourself and selling that aspect of yourself is probably something that's really valuable. But that's really why we as an organization decided to bring you in, and it's been a fantastic experience us working with you. But I think right now we're going to ask you a little bit about the tie that you're wearing today, and you get to tell a little bit of a story about the tie that you're wearing.
So this is a little bit of an inside joke with the organization. I got it for a Halloween costume ways back and just held on to it. And it's a bit of a small organization, WWI, we're growing, but at the time when I first joined the organization, we rotated through who led the chair meetings. And my turn came up, and I was, we were working from home, it was virtual. Most of the time people wear pretty, relatively casual clothing. And I was just like, I want to make this fun. I want to make it memorable. So I tuned into the meeting in a full suit attire with this tie and sunglasses, because I kind of thought that finished the picture. And it went over quite well with everybody. I think everybody really liked it. So I figured that meant that I had to wear it for every single meeting after that point. And I have. So for the last year, every meeting that we have, this beautiful tie comes out, and this is the last time.
So you had to wear it today.
I did.
Going back to the subject matter itself, what mental health interventions do you think, or do you want to see in sport? What needs to be there for athletes like you?
Well, I have so many answers to that question, so I will try to keep it relatively brief. But just like off the top of my head, I mentioned this earlier, but making sure that we have sports psychologists or psychologists who understand sport to help athletes when they are struggling with their mental health, just to really fill that gap there. But I also think there's so many different ways that we can educate athletes by, like different weekly things that we can do, or monthly, teaching kids from a young age, like having actual education programs to give kids that understanding, the vocabulary, the knowing where to reach out for resources. I also feel like, how concussion testing is becoming more common in sport, and at the beginning of every year, basically you do a concussion test to find your baseline, to make sure that when you do, if you get a concussion, go in to the doctors, they can compare that to what your normal baseline is. I think we should have that for mental health as well. I think we need mental health check-ins at the beginning of every year so that athletes can kind of compare their answers to previous answers, so they can see how they're changing over chronological time. I think programming for retired athletes would be so helpful, and having career discussions before you retire. Just having an idea of what your future could look like, whether it be in 2 months when you retire or 5 years when you retire. I don't think there's a wrong time to start that conversation. So that kind of programming. And I'm also hoping to have a much more robust answer for that question after I do my master's degree, which I am going to get very, very soon, which I'm really excited about. It's called Sport, Physical Activity, and Mental Health. So it's actually exactly what we're talking about today. It's got that focus on mental health within sport, and I'm hoping to do more of a zoom in on professional sport specifically, and also youth and competitive and growing up as an athlete on the trajectory for professional sport. And I'm hoping that when I'm done that year of school, I will have even more ideas of good and helpful interventions that we can put in place, and the whole spectrum of beginning to end life of a professional athlete.
Right. So that's what's next. You're off to school to do a master's degree. Do you have any plans after that?
So it's a 1-year program, so I'm hoping to go experience that, hopefully learn a lot, fingers crossed. And then I want to come back to Vancouver, and I really want to make a huge difference in my work, day-to-day work, in the professional sports system. I think, like we've talked about a lot today, there's a lot of different areas that professional sport has room for improvement, and I really want to make some of those changes. I want to come back and hopefully, talk to some major sport organizations and really get into that, getting into the little details about how we can make that systematic change and really teach athletes that they're human beings and that they deserve to have boundaries and sick days and mental health treatment and career advisement and all of those things that we just tend to overlook so much of the time.
What you have been talking about today, what I really take from this is like the amount of time, energy, and effort, both physically and mentally, it takes to become to an athlete that performs at that level. But I think you described nicely that it really takes a more holistic view of the person and the individual, not just during their time when they're actually in the sport, but what comes later for them, down the road. And I think you speak very well on the subject. And so, I would like to thank you for the work that you've been doing, not only here at the organization, but before we even brought you on board. And we look forward to seeing you in the future and what you can accomplish with your master's degree.
Yeah, thank you for giving me this opportunity to share more of my story. I obviously really enjoy this aspect of advocacy, but I'm really, really excited to see these bigger changes happen as I become more ingrained into the actual workforce as opposed to just talking about it. So thank you for giving me the platform, and thank you for all of the opportunities that you've presented me as well. It's been a really great time working here.
It's been great working with you. So thank you.
Thanks.
Continue your learning and connect with us at www.workwellnessinstitute.org.